Haha. Am I muted? Can you still not hear me? So, anyway, I'll retell the anecdote that you were muted during. Yesterday evening, I was doing a recording of Mortal Science and had a mini meltdown debating over emergent dynamics and math. And what I realized as I had this meltdown is that what I was responding to was the pamphlet we were going over, and I'll get to that in a minute. And the the way in which I'd seen, let's say, technocratic forces abuse applied mathematics by focusing totally on the generalizability of their quanta, um, but not the validity of their categories. Now, that at first seems a very esoteric thing to have a mild breakdown at someone about, and in many ways it is, but it's actually going to bring me to a lot of things today that I don't think a lot of people are going to like to hear. Um, I've been doing with Esri K a Esri K Esri XB a series of introductions to Marxism, where we read the introduction and talk about what it says Marxism is and break it down historically and compare it to what we know from actual history. Now, this gets esoteric pretty quickly. One of the things that I realized, though, is in studying these introductions to Marxism, how so many of them are hobbled together through jargon, hiding things that they don't want you to ask too much into. Um, and what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of them were, they'll play loose goosey with the word science and in a way that reminds me, frankly, of like Protestant creationists. They will um, use just so stories to build up their ideational myths, basically. They'll misimply, Hegelian categories to the point that you can't even really know what they're talking about. They'll quote mine um, various Marxist figures, although usually very little actual Marx is in these pamphlets. That's another thing I find fascinating, how little Marx is quoted in Marxism pamphlets. But they'll even quote mine like pre-Socratic philosophers and use bad scholarship and pseudepigraphal quotes to make points. It's maddening. Um, Now, in and of itself, it doesn't matter, but it's a kind of semantic pollution. All right, to use a phrase I'm going to steal from Esri. You know, you have all these claims about things being thrown at you all the time, and they look secular, they look reasonable, but when you start using any kind of self training and being uh, critical, um, what you see is basically ways to break people off into identity communities, and that are ideological, not the way we commonly use identity these days being some kind of demographic marker. Um, the qualia of some kind of demographic marker, right? Like your lived experience as an X person. But that's not really what's going on most of the time. Now, that's not really also anything new. And that brings me to another part of what got me thinking today. Every afternoon, I walk my dog. After, as soon as I'm done with my teaching duties, which is usually between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, and I was walking my dog today. I was listening to a podcast because I usually listen to music or a podcast when I walk my dog. Um, and I was listening to this podcast, Disney Origin Stories, so a political podcast. This guy had been supported by his wife, who was some kind of business manager in California. COVID ended her career. She now works at a Walmart in Arizona. He's trying to make a podcast work because he also can't find work easily. And he's been encouraged to keep this going. But, the podcast just basically, you know, helps pay a few bills and that's it. From estimating his cost that he was talking about and knowing what this stuff cost myself, I'd say he's making $500 a month, $600 a month from Patreon, and half it's going into his production. That's $300 a month, and even in Arizona, that didn't go very far. But what broke him down wasn't even that. It was the fact that he had both left wingers and right wingers combing his material to send him letters and abuse him for, you know, basically not taking the political reading of the stories that they wanted in a certain way. This guy just sounds like a normie, kind of center liberal guy. Struggling. Probably really struggling. He sounded like he was beginning to break, and he's going to probably end his podcast. Now, I'm not one to inquire about every podcaster in the world. It's an overly glutted field. One of the few things Jody Dean was right about is that media works on power law. And as we move into a skills rentier economy, production of material is almost valueless. There's so much material being produced and it's being driven down to nothing, which doesn't cost much to produce, right? I could get into why I believe, like, this stuff is why I believe in labor through your value still, but that's sort of an obscure question. So what's my point in this? Of course you would like that. This is what I'm responding to. I'm gonna be better about flashing these comments up so people who aren't in the live stream know what I'm talking about. But let's get into what I found fascinating about this. First, it's a power law problem. And the power law problem just means that there's exponential growth in this stuff. And it's harder and harder to even like minor league, what we call grift. Petty proprietorship becomes harder and harder to do. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a musician and you're selling CDs 20 years ago. You sell them for $15. You can produce them probably, the physical machine can probably produce them for about 99 cents, but your cost to use about $5. You can make $10, sell 35 CDs, not have that much outreach, and have at least made back what you probably spent making the CDs. And now someone has your music. Now let's go to Spotify. Spotify, because everything is paid for by advertising, you make a single, it gets listened to 1,000 times. And what happens? Yeah, zero marginal cost because technology has reduced socially necessary labor time to almost nothing. Sorry, mutualist. But what happens? People know what I'm talking about. Well, now on Spotify, you now have 1,000 people consuming your work as opposed to, I don't know, 25. But you made probably $4. On YouTube, for example, it's hard to say a video is successful unless it has 60, 70,000 views. A live stream it has 600 eyes for the whole thing. That's the equivalent to filling a stadium, but that's not that impressive on YouTube. You only want that from the consumer end. Yeah. So yeah, mutualist. The problem is the only way to pay for free shit to compensate people for their time of creating it, since you're not keeping them afloat other ways, is to have rents. Rents are inherently monopolistic. That's what a rent is. It's monopoly access. That's what happens when commodity markets break down. They tend to become rental markets. And we see the increasing across the entire economy of skills rents. Now, this is the rational core of the PMC thesis. This is what I've been trying to get you to understand when I talk about, my problems with the PMC is the way it's presented. It can be used in any other way, but there is a real core here. Skills rents are increasingly part of the economy, as are access rents and tech rents, otherwise known as IP. Free shit's awesome if you have a socially constructed things where people can produce it and consume it for free. Otherwise, you're a parasite. End of discussion. I know anarchists like to just believe that the goodness of their hearts will keep us all alive. Economies don't work that way. Social reproduction doesn't work that way, even in primitive economies. And this, my friends, brings me to a big dose of fucking reality that I want you guys to listen to. Because I'm going to probably piss every group that's a fan of me off in some way today. One, I've been dealing a lot with stem lord Marxism. And I am both impressed with it because we need to return, people who claim to be doing science to having their generalizations being able to be mathematified, to make up a word. If you're making a generalization, you can't make it mathematically, probably shouldn't trust that generalization. Not to say that there is no truth that can't be quantified. All right. But if you have people who are talking about economics and won't even talk about it in numerical probabilities, they're full of crap. The reason why Marxists have backed off from the math in which they have done in the past, even though the more I look at Grossman's stuff and I really think about applying it, should we be trying to get rid of IP law? Not before you have something to replace it. And by I mean something to replace it, like everybody approaches things as if you can ad hoc change a society and it not be a fucking klug. All right? Reformism versus revolution. Although, whatever that means and whatever that means. You get rid of IP laws in the current society, then a lot of stuff just becomes free. But you know what will immediately happen is right now, all the appearance of profitability in the system. Look at what's profitable in the United States. Look at the most tinkering towards utopia. You should be better than that, Nico. I say this only half jokingly. I'm beginning to think the DSA should be put up against the wall. What do you guys care about? Seriously, what do you care about? What broke me today is I was listening to this man talk about how all these people were calling him everything from, a softie. Yeah, I'm gonna ignore chat for a second. I'll come back to you, nerds. From everyone telling you, from everyone calling this man a softie who didn't support Gina Carano to telling him to kill himself because he was a misogynist making a podcast that's listener base was 80% women, because he argued that technically the original fairy tale, Belle is not kidnapped. She agrees to stay, which is true. She does consent to it. And what I found fascinating about all this is people now invest so much time into policing discourse patterns and they're not doing shit to change their world. Changing discourses, changing thoughts and minds changes the world, right? Grow up. What it leads to is a bunch of narcissistic people who are self-righteous, abusing other people, and basically sublimating their own inability to be politically effective and their own inability to build institutions that could change anything into bullying. If you think that's a useful political strategy, I would like to inform you of some key facts about our world right now. You cannot fix this ad hoc. No, I'm not saying just the right doesn't want to change the world, Ben. I'm saying almost none of you do. You want to be moral consumers while also saying there's no moral consumption under capitalism. That's what people want. You want to rail against the PMC instead, if you're an anti-left socialist, while not looking at why this situation happened in the first place. You look at the friggin' trees. No, it's not even that you're missing the forest for the trees. You're missing the tree for the leaf. You're not even getting anywhere near the forest. Profitability has been declining. The most profitable industries were literally propped up by venture capital investment schemes and the government until they could accumulate enough capital to then buy up massive amount of things with inflated non-assets. This leads me to another thing that I'm beginning to worry about. A lot of the left is being bamboozled by their own BS. They're sick of their own fumes. If it makes you feel any better, I'm not raging at anyone in specific. I'm mad. I'm mad because I'm listening to watching leftists courses do the same thing they always do. You know what? Ask yourself, what things do functionally is what they actually do, right? What they're intended to do is not their actual function. Why is the petty bourgeois so reactive right now? Because they're high on the hog and able to have massive voter bases. Have you been to these areas? Are you just so firmly stuck in Brooklyn that you haven't really studied anything outside of it? My fans embarrass me. Historically speaking, things that look like manorial societies, aka things that look like feudalism, is what happens when the rentier market declines. Let's talk about rates of profit. Rates of profit have stagnated because they weren't very high to begin with. The power of the petty bourgeoisie is pretty much non-existent. If you see where most of them are going, they are stagnating, which is why they're getting so reactionary. Fundamental mistaken assumption of classical socialism, going back to the 19th century, is that the proletarianization would make it apparent that people should join up with the proletariat, right? So far, the opposite is true. How do you figure? You want care to justify your generalizations? Ah, small non-farm capitalist it is. Yeah, because we weren't that developed. We're now having an economic fight. Part of your problem, Nico, is you're actually taking the inclusion of skills rents as part of the profit rates, which is why it would look to be stagnating. If you actually look at just commodities, which I've even seen the economists do, you see massive drop offs. But you need to look at real commodities, not IP commodities, which are increasingly rare. We were pretty developed in US social. What the fuck are you talking about? We've never been a social democracy. Are you talking about FDR era policies? Someone drag this kid out and shoot him. Well, you guys are proving to me that I can't that the lack of trust is justified. You're talking about Fordism as a U.S. model for social democracy. You might as well be Peter Turchin on that. Nico, I strongly suggest you read some actual histories of the progressive movement that aren't so filled with DSA pink colored glasses. Um, then don't use the term. Why are you my fan? Like, I'm listening to you talk and realizing that we're political enemies. Since we have no common program to build off of, there's nothing that can be done. There's no building there to be done. And if our common program is based on Fordism, which is literally the result of being the last man standing after World War II, more than any FDR policies that were anemic and mostly just incentivizing um, incentivizing hiring through private means with some government backstop and less than most progressives actually say there were when you actually study it. It makes the Maoists look right. Behind every social democrat is an imperialist who doesn't want to look how their high point actually happened. The thing is, I don't. So you're pro monopoly capital. You're a Hilferdingite. I just want to remind you what you guys got yourselves into in World War II. But you know what? All this is LARPing, let's be honest. Uh, why is it LARPing? Because I'm too mad to do this. I had a lot of other things to say. I think I'm going to start back recording these on my own. Let's walk through a couple scenarios. Let's talk about what's actually likely to happen. Maybe they should, instead of reading and grasping theory and history, they should, be Actually, I'm gonna let's recap, and I will tell you what I'm concerned about. One, even including um, IPs, general capital is being concentrated and profit rates are stagnant. Two, Heinrich's, by the way, someone asked me this. Heinrich's denial of Marx believing in the rate of profit to fall is based off of a letter where he posits kind of a counterexample, and then because he never says it's a law, it's a tendency. Um, the law of the tendency of rates of profits to fall because there are other countervailing tendencies. I don't think so anymore. No, I don't actually. I don't think grasping the theory in history is one of the most important things people can do. Um, because you don't do anything with it, and most people bend it to what they want because they're not engaged in anything that they could do with it. You know, if we take Marx's maxim, the point is to change the world, not just to understand it. Yes, you do actually have to understand the world, as Heidegger says as a retort to Marx, but you also have to do something with it. And most people are not in the position to do anything with what they're building. And a lot of their psychological habits that they have inculcated under the social media environments that they interact in are highly deleterious for them ever being able to do it. When you focus so much on the discourse patterns, and you focus so much on where you spend a lot of your mental energy, which is increasingly in these very, very superficial parasocial identity relationships, right? Like the theory is not going to help you. Yeah, yeah, I know you're a Bordigist, so we can invariant and have a strategy of infinite patience till the end of time, and then communism will come upon us when we have the right moment to make it. I know it's not that simple, but that's effectively what it ends up as. Let me tell you three things that tell me people don't really want change. One, they're not interested in doing what it would take to build the institutions up to eventually have a counterpower. They want the institutions before them. Two, because they don't have the skills to build those institutions. Because the systems have gotten infinitely more complex than when this started in the 19th century. Because specialization limits people from being able to do all components of what it would take to do most, a lot of these simple things. Like I think about running a health clinic, right? Running a health clinic in the 19th century, you're probably offering this. You probably can do some nursing stuff. 19th century, that would be imaginative, but medicine still pretty. They're making rapid leaps in this heroic period of medicine, but you're just as likely to die from going to the doctor as not during that time period. You could probably replicate a lot of the services pretty easily. But you can't do that now. When you talk to communist militants, right? You ask them, "Would you go into the military to get the skills to be a militant?" And they say no. Would you learn the requisite sciences? Learn how to code, do some basic hacking, as is brought up here. Learn how to do that, at least defensively. Would you learn economics in a serious way that didn't just blow smoke up the ass of your already held political positions? Would you challenge yourself? That's the first question anyone's got to ask. Eric, I know you would. I mean, this is not actually at you. It's at the larger culture of the left. Yeah, are actually people who are upper middle class. I hate to say this, and this is going to be one of the most offensive things I probably ever said. There's a lot of like, oh, if we had more workers, we'd do this. I was in a political party with a bunch of elite college bound post trots, and I was in a political party with a bunch of community college educated working class people. And good. Um, I can tell you which one was competent. I hate to say it. You know, as someone who came up from the working class myself, you know, I was pretty shocked at how de-skilled a lot of the people in that party that I was in were. The assumption in classical socialism is that skills would increase nearly infinitely through the socialization of labor in the factory process. That was a naive assumption. One that I actually, there is a socialization of labor of Marx, but the kind of hyper optimism you see in it in the early 20th century is not in Marx in the same way. I have a question. This is always kind of amused me. Isn't that why cadres are supposed to educate workers so the groups are more than just a few anti-socialist? Um, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. You have 150 years of that model being tried, and it does not work. Um, but let's ask ourselves why. All right. If the workers are distorted by capitalism, why would the activist also not be distorted by capitalism? Because they have the right ideas in their head. But one of the ideas in their head is the idea that a lot of your ideas are determined by your material position in society. Not all of them, and only in aggregate, admittedly. But why would you be special? Because you happen to accidentally walk into the right socialist group at the right time? You know, most people's attachment to a socialist group is the one that they got attached to first. Yeah, except that I think you can get, I think you can work your way through this with facts. But if you think a special group of cadres are just going to be able to do it because they have the right ideas, that's nuts. Like, go and educate the workers, and things will just go as we say. We know what's best, but we also, which is funny, right? Because that is absolutely not how Marx treated the international. Nico's back on my good side again. I'm sorry to threaten to have you shot, Nico. You're lucky it's the internet. You're not really in danger. This is performative anger. But this is why the follow rate of profit is important. This is also why you can't say that, like, this is also why the immiseration thesis doesn't work. Right? Like, let's get into there's various problems here. One, the idea of cadre education in and of itself is going to be enough to radicalize the workers. We just don't have evidence for it. I mean, the CIO joined with the AFL and got purged. So I mean, like, you can't even say that they were blameless in their own purging. Um, to The problem that we have right now is that we tend to think we have an invariant theory that explains a lot of this. We have some general trends that seem to be holding to be true. Um, Only sometimes. Creative destruction is a Schumpeter way of talking about how the business cycle destroys stuff, but it doesn't always destroy enough, right? We have gluts. But we're gonna have a left communist versus sock dem fight. This is gonna be fun. But let's be honest for a minute. When I talk about all this being LARPy, let's talk about some other trends that are going to happen, and that so far I don't see people dealing with. The situation can be less de-skilled than they were 5 years ago. Ah, yes, the old post-stone line. I'm going to say something about subject to object, the revolutionary subject brain. Capital is a subject of blah blah blah, not the proletariat. Proletariat have nothing to do with their chains. The subject of the revolutionary subject is capital itself. Blah blah blah. Um, It's actually not. You see, what's funny is you would think it would be leading to more skills, and it is easier for people to learn skills, but no, they are still de-skilled. In fact, it's worse because most people don't know how to look up questions on the internet. The assumption that you don't need base, memorization rote knowledge to know how to look up other forms of rote knowledge is a bad assumption. So we have decreased skills and decreased literacy at the time with the most access to both. No, they're not. No, they're not. I'm a teacher. I can tell you they are not. What's happening to literacy rates in the United States? Do you know? They're declining. They weren't that great for an industrialized world, but all the industrialized world actually has lower literacy rates than you expect. So people keep on projecting because people like them do these things. You reject aggregate stats. That's social siloing. We're not de-skilled. Yeah, you are. There's no reason for you to be. The information is now out there. The gatekeepers aren't as there anymore, but it doesn't matter. Nor has the lack of gatekeepers stopped the expansion of credentialing because it doesn't matter. It is actually. Anyone who's done research on it needs to look up. Rote learning is actually very valuable to critical thinking. I mean, no one likes homework. No one should like homework. Like, just like no one should have a dream job. Like, who should dream about labor? You might have a dream profession, but it shouldn't be a job, right? Yeah, well, I agree with you. They do have more access to skills. They have infinite access to skills. But the question we got to ask ourselves, E minor, is why isn't it mattering? Montessori is fine for children, for young children. It's not great for finishing skills off. I'm so frustrated right now because I can predict some trends that are going to happen. One, a lot of the MMT left is pushing for this focus on zero interest rates. Zero interest rates during this pandemic Literacy's declined about 3 points, but it's much lower than people think in general. 80% of the population cannot read at an 8th grade level. Now that leveling, it might be a little bit, but yeah, it's that bad. Um, what's worrying is though, E minors and from from 1970 to 2015, literacy was stagnant, but it wasn't declining. Now it's declining. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it'd be great if we could run our own schools, etc. Incorporate them into meaningful work, teach skills that aren't just academic. I mean, we do a lot of that now, but there's also a tendency of people to overly defend the current institutions as they exist, right? Which is weird to me because it's like it's defending something that was not designed. Um, I said 80% of the population cannot read cannot read and comprehend consistently above an 8th grade level. Now, to be fair, like when I say that, also there's not that much that you read outside of academic stuff that's written above an 8th grade level in the first place. So people don't functionally need it either. That's again, it's sort of it's like it's a catch 22, right? So um so you have what you call like a it's called a litter it's like a reinforcement spiral, it's a feedback loop. um Literacy's low, so you slightly lower style guides to meet common literacy levels, which also then reinforces the level of literacy, et cetera, and so forth. But that had pretty much just stagnated in the 1970s. And interestingly, before that, what you had is the literacy of, the required reading skills to read documents were going down, but more and more people could read, all right, at all. So it was sort of like an equaling out. Um, yes and no. They don't have to learn to read at a very high level. Um, I will say though, absolute illiteracy I encountered a lot more in elderly Southerners. Like people could not read at all. No, I haven't read that essay. Oh no, I have read it. Never mind. I have. I'm brain dead. What were the developing trends in literacy? Well, literacy was increasing with industrialization. Um, I mean, that was a actually pretty standard trend until about the 1950s. Um, Literacy then started increasing with increased attendance of public schools, and it actually topped out when public schools were pretty much had universal low, attendance below 7th grade. And yes, I'm not talking about film literacy and numeracy. Like we can get into that. I think numeracy is a big problem. It's a numeracy in the United States is a huge problem. I did a Swampside Chats episode on that. You can listen to that if you'd like. But I left Proud Plus 7 years ago, so I was only a member for a year. I was only a fellow traveler for a year and a half before that. I also think if you I also think that some of the scholarship produced out of there is sketch. But look, it's just so much better than a lot of what I hear in the general left, and I know why it's appealing. You know why I push programmatic unity so much as opposed to left unity? Do you know why I push educating yourself? You know why I don't attack the PMC people, the post left or anti left for being against the left. Actually, I attack them for being pro other things. um, is because I think a lot of the cultural habitus of the left is, as I was getting in the very beginning of my essay when I was reading all these brain killing pamphlets that were just spouting nonsense. Um, it's the focus on theory in a way that actually makes you functionally unable to do that much. Um, and theory and history are very important. I don't know that they're most important. Eric and I might disagree on that, but most people want to learn. The problem is what the way. For example, you hear the stupid example about education doesn't teach you to do taxes and blah blah blah. Actually, we do. We just don't teach you specific tax laws because they change too much. But we don't explain to you how to use them in a practical and applied context. It's taught horribly. Um, yes, I'll read that for people who are just listening. You think it's inevitable that America pulls out of Afghanistan because it pushes India to contain China, which will inevitably antagonize Pakistan? I think it's inevitable they're pulling out of Afghanistan for that reason. I also think the U.S. needs is having to focus on actual defense initiatives for once, because they have imperial competition that's not weak and can outproduce them. Yeah, that's part of it. Um, Problematic unity is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, and it isn't based on projected identity categories that are in parasocial relationships. Why is Platypus so obsessed with dictatorships of proletariat? Because they consider that marks his prime innovation into socialism. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. No, it's not actually. It really isn't just a problem with civilians. It also affects everything. Not to pull a cliche, this is going to be my last thought, and I didn't get everything I wanted to tell you about. One of the things I wanted to tell you about is this polarization and and the areas outside of these blue liberators getting poorer and poorer is probably going to be exacerbated by COVID, particularly if people are right about herd immunity issues. Because there will be private mandates that get that done on a municipal level in rich cities, but that's not going to happen in a lot of red states, and that's going to lead to many COVID outbreaks, particularly as the vaccines start to work and COVID starts to starve out and start to we're seeing a lot of convergent evolution in COVID to the similar types of things. That's an indication that it's having to adapt faster. Um, if you don't have herd immunity, you'll just breed a stronger, uh, you'll beat a stronger set of mini outbreak conditions, and that's going to actually probably increase poverty between regions of the country greatly, and going to further destabilize things. Furthermore, I mean, you're going to see that worldwide too. That's not just going to be a trend in the United States. This is the kind of stuff that's more important than policing each other. I mean, yes, policing each other is important. You got to watch out for things, I guess. Actually, policing each other is the wrong way to think about it. Um, Building a community that understands how to deliver things and can actually be somewhat sufficient is um, super important. And that's got to be based off real things. It can't just be based on ideological unity. It just can't. Yeah, you'll see seasonal COVID, but more in red. What'll happen is you'll see it more in already poor areas in red states than you do in big urban cities, where there's an incentive to keep everyone vaccinated and there's much more vaccine compliance if the vaccine works. Right now it is. So, you know, I know I have my vaccine skeptics. There's a lot more of them, both left and right, but it is what it is. Um, so to recap, I threatened to fan. I hate all of you. Um, Things are continuing to get worse. There are countervailing tendencies in the rate of profit the fall. They're gonna be interesting. They're actually limiting America's imperial power right now, but there's there yeah. Oh well, that would be a Pell that he thinks figured it all out with labor tokens. But you know, how are you going to implement council communism? So much of this becomes eschatology. If the strategy of patience is infinite, it's eschatology. Anyway, I got to prepare. I got to do an interview in a half an hour. You guys can find me back here then. This will probably get flagged for me doing some horrible stuff. Um, Now, no need to flagellate. That doesn't help. I think that would be where we might. Never mind. What do you mean by material conditions and how? No, the answer to these questions is the tension between material conditions and how you can change them. If you cannot change them at all, then there is literally nothing you can do, and history becomes entirely stochastic. In which case, I have a Stanislav Lem book that would make you. What do you think? I think we see evidence of it. China's benefiting. That's about it. But even China's growth is slowing, but it's still way better than everybody else's. So yeah, well, I want people to start looking at the material conditions more than their ideological assumptions. And by material conditions, we should be clear by what we mean. We should be like, what's going on in the larger world economically? What are the things that are happening in the environment? Like what's going on with climate change? What's going on with pandemics? What's going on, you know, what's going on with different profitability areas? Why are things slowing down? How are these companies that aren't very profitable getting so much money? I bet you'll find that zero interest rate is very much related to how Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are some of the richest people in the world. But you also just one of the things I've noticed on the left in the last 5 years is it's focused almost totally on singular polities, usually the United States, and not on the world system as a whole. Both in terms of their policy advocacy, except like revolution everywhere or some vague stuff like that, but not actually looking, I think, very deeply. Um, and that's a problem. Uh, Michael Brooks and I don't share the same politics, and um, um, but and he's dead. I miss him. But he did at least try to do that, even if I didn't agree with what he said all about geopolitics a lot of the time. I'm just tired of this crap. I'm tired of I'm tired of doing educational pamphlets and then feeling like I'm being gaslit by leftists even. And then watching culture war fights, which totally feeds into like parasocial identity formation, but shuts down your rational brain, dominating discourse. And all these important things are happening while most people are focusing on the wrong things. I'm still not so hot on Jody. I don't think I do. Jody Jean thinks we've all become peasants. That's not true. Um, we're not a peasants defined by economy. What we are is stuck in a rentier economy, and it could be neo feudal. Um, I'm just thinking through the logical implications of stagnant profitability with increased wealth concentration due to fiscal policy. Actually, that'd be funny. Actually, um, Brooks thought that I was very very smart and also a zealot. No, it wouldn't be the same as feudalism, but it also I don't think it would. If you have no commodity profitability, if you actually hit zero on that, it's not capitalism anymore either. Well, he knew me; he could have done one. He did not like my opinion on Bernie Sanders. I will tell you that. Why did Brooks think I was a zealot? Because I said that the Bernie Sanders movement was doomed to fail because the institutional counterpower to the main funding apparatus of the Democratic Party had not been dealt with and could not be dealt with by solely focusing on Bernie, and that focusing on the executive was a non-starter, that it would get you into a circular problem that I see Adolf Reed actually got into, which is you are trying to create the workers' movement with Bernie Sanders, but you needed the workers' movement for Bernie Sanders to exist, and then Bernie Sanders now is operating more effectively from his point of view, and the Democratic Party has channeled everything back into it, which is what I predicted would happen. I actually predicted this way before the anti-left post-left whatever did. You can go back to me talking to Doug Lane about this as early as 2015. It's a pretty predictable trend. And the predictable trend actually, I hadn't read Perowski yet, but Adam Perowski, who is an anti-communist uh, Marxist, um, yeah, they didn't say that at the time. Well, this is something I think people have agency. Okay, I want to get this out. Well, he thought I was a zealot. You know, I also have a tendency to, I don't know, get angry with people, and like, I no longer have weapons because I don't want them, because I have an anger problem. Um, and I don't like to hurt people. Although occasionally I get really mad and say that we should drag someone out back and put them up against the wall. I don't really mean that. I may be slightly over the top. Let me inform you, um, that my over the topness comes from real stuff. Nah, not from me. I suppose one of the things you can say about me is, I'm going to use a bad sitcom plot, actually a bad movie plot. I'm going to go with Serenity. The weird zealot at the end of Serenity. Yeah, but he was uncritical of it in a way that was predictable, actually. I mean, like, and he often didn't listen to left critics of the pink tide within Latin American countries. And he did know about them. That's not to say that he wasn't doing us a good service in actually covering that stuff, because of so much of the U.S. left had abandoned talking about foreign policy altogether. And Brooks was one of the few people who was good on that. But Brooks wanted to believe. He wanted to believe in people too, like sincerely as a person. You know, my interactions with him were like that. That's thick enough to stop most bullets. Well, that's one of the things I've always wondering when people talk about the working class, right? What do they mean? If you mean it the way Marx says it, it just means anyone involved in the circuit of production, not just those who directly produce commodities. Um, yeah, Michael Brooks always said, "Hate systems, love people," which I think is um, a good heuristic, but it often led him to be naive. Um, You know what? A lot of people have said some very stupid things, though, trying to get the U.S. to see examples of socialism in other countries when they don't predict how they're going to pay out. Anyway, you guys are going to make me talk about talking about Mark Fisher, talking about Michael Brooks is hard for me to do. So we weren't close. I'm not going to pretend like we were close friends. I'm much closer to Doug Lane. I know Ben Burgess personally. Yeah, but they didn't say it at the time. Like, yes, I do. That's actually, I think the best American novel is Peace by Jane Wolfe, Dennis Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I'm recording a Pop the Left tonight. That's actually why I got to get off and get ready. Erica, we need to set up a time for you to come back on and for us to talk history again, for you to stop me from yelling threats at my audience. They aren't leftist. There. Yes, it is the Achilles heel. Well, it's one of the many, but it's like you have an Achilles and they have 9 heels, but it's one of the biggest ones. Um that has to do with profitability, guys. Has to do with profitability, and it has to do with people living longer than you know what its pension funds were set up for. But I gotta go. Read Mario Musto's book. So read Mario Musto's book because they go through the letters better, and then find the letters yourselves from that. Like they're not even all available yet. The Mega 2 is not all ready. So yeah, I'll be back with PH to talk about Italian stuff in 15 minutes.